My journey from atheism to enlightenment, it hasn't been pretty, but I can tell you what I've learned. I've learned that we are limitless and that all of our power, it lies within. The truth, it's been hidden. So if you're ready to step in and take your own power back, then welcome to your fate. Welcome, everyone, to the next episode of Fate. How's everybody doing out there? On today's show, I am bringing you one of the world's leading experts on hand reading. His name's Christopher Jones, and we are going to be talking about whether or not your fate literally lies in your own hands. Christopher Jones, welcome to your fate, my friend. How you doing today?
Good morning, Christy. It's early morning here in New Zealand, and I'm doing great. And I'm very excited to be here talking with you. So nice to meet you. Thank you for inviting me on your show.
Thank you for joining me all the way from New Zealand. I love it. I'm super fascinated by the topic of, I used to say palm reading. I know that we're going to talk about hand reading, palm reading, chirology is its official, scientific, and appropriate name. But why don't we first tell me a little bit about yourself and how you became one of the world's leading expert in this scientific denomination that really nobody talks about a lot. So let's how did you get involved in this?
Well, I was lucky enough to get involved with it earlier in my life in 1983. So I've been looking at hands since 1983, and I was about 20 years of age at the time, and I was exploring the world and trying to find things out. I was at university studying sociology and social sciences and psychology, and I went to a meditation class, and I started getting interested in Buddhism, and then went to a yoga class, and I started doing yoga. I became a yoga teacher. I was a yoga teacher for 15 years as well. And then the yoga teacher his class I was going to, she just drew my birth chart up for me. So she drew my astrology chart, and that was the first time I'd had that done. And then she said, "Oh, and I'm teaching a course on hand reading next term. Would you like to come along?" And I thought, "Oh, okay, fine. That's interesting. Knowing nothing, as one doesn't know anything when you're 20. And so I went along, and I had my hands read by a guy called Dylan Warren Davis, who was the secretary of the Chirological Society. So she was running courses as a tutor within the Chirological Society that were based in London. And the Chirological Society is actually really old. It was actually founded in 1889. So it's had a pretty checkered career, but it went for about 30 years in the early parts of the 20th century, and then it was revived again in 1975. So I joined the society, and then I did all the courses that they ran, and then I became the secretary of the society, and then I ran it for 10 years. So I was the most prolific hand reader in the United Kingdom between, say, 89 and 1999. And I wrote 15 books, and I produced a journal, and I did all this research in the libraries. And so the book that I've got coming out now, the Palmistry of Fingerprint Patterns, is actually an updated version of a book that I wrote in 1991. So it was based upon my researches in the Bodleian Library at Oxford University. So after my first degree, I went to Oxford University and did a master's degree in philosophy and theology. And that gave me access to a library called the Bodleian Library, which is a repository library of every book that gets published in the United Kingdom. And so not only did it have every book that you could think of, it also had every palmistry book going back to the 12th century. The oldest thing I found in the Bodleian Library was written in 1160. And so I had access to all this material, so I thought I would research all of that. So I spent 5 years really researching hand reading very thoroughly, both historically, both the scientific material in the Bodleian Library, all the stuff about fingerprints and dermatoglyphics. And then I was teaching, and a lot of the people that I was teaching in the 1990s have actually carried on working as hand readers since that time, and they've had 30-year careers as professional hand readers. And so some of them are quite well known in different countries around the world, and they've all had books published, and they've been nagging me for 20 years. "Oh, come on, you've got to get your books published. You've got to get your books published." And I said, "Well, I'm busy," because I came to New Zealand, I got married and had children and did the whole family life thing, which is obviously takes a lot of time and effort, and I prioritized that for 20 years. So the book has been a long time coming. And what's great about it is that because I wrote it such a long time ago, and because I made about 100 copies of it and I gave it to these students that I was teaching, they've actually used it for the last 30 years as their kind of reference book on how to read hands, and particularly how to read the fingerprint patterns, because the book is called The Palmistry of Fingerprints because it only focuses on the fingerprints. I don't talk about the lines. I don't talk about anything else on the hand, just the fingerprints. And the reason that fingerprints are kind of often overlooked in the study of handwriting. So that's kind of a more or less outline of how I got to where I am now. I mean, in the Chirological Society, I was the only person to do all the advanced studies in that organization. And as I said, I spent so much time teaching it and researching it. I taught hundreds and hundreds of people around the world. But it's a passion that I've had for a long time, since 1983.
Yeah. It's fascinating because, like, you know, when I think of like hand reading, palm reading, whatever you want to say, you get that old depiction of like reading tarot, getting your tarot cards read, getting your palms read, or kind of in that same little vein. Can we back up to talk a little bit about how even reading your palms came about? Like, how did reading your hand become the blueprint that it is today, that you can glean so much information from just understanding the contours and the positions of certain things on your hands? Can we talk about how
Yeah,
this came to
sure. I
be
mean,
known?
that's a really big topic, and that's like saying what's the history of hand reading and how did it come, where
It
did it come
is.
from? But
Well,
we'll try
you
and give a
know,
short answer to that because
yeah,
the book I wrote on that was 65,000
brief.
words, so it's kind of
Yeah,
quite a long topic. Um,
yeah.
okay,
Let's do
essentially,
the shortened version.
yeah. This is the short version. Okay, so the essential issue is this: is people
Yes.
trying to find understanding and meaning. That's basically what people are trying to do with a lot of things, including astrology, including handwriting, including science. Actually, science is really the study of meaning, like who are we, why are we, and what are we doing here. So chirology, in that sense, is following the general scientific inquiry: who are we, what are we, and what we're doing here. But that's understood differently in different times. So there are traditions of hand reading that go back thousands of years in India and in China, and in Europe. The oldest records we have go back, as I mentioned earlier, to the 12th century. But all of those traditions are kind of couched in sort of religious or spiritual perspectives. So in China, they were very strongly influenced by the by the I Ching, and so they were looking for the trigrams in the hands and the lines of the hands, and they were saying, if we see these trigrams, then we can work out what that means. And they were using it in a divinatory way, just like you would use the I Ching by throwing coins or using yarrow stalks. And so this idea that we can do divination from the hand is very much part of that tradition. In India, the tradition was people with special abilities and special powers would have special marks in their hands. So it's a traditional story that the Buddha or an upcoming Buddha, reincarnated Buddha, would have wheels in his hands. So we think that they meant world, which is a type of fingerprint pattern, the spiral shape. So this idea that there are special marks in your hand is a part of the Indian tradition. And if you know what those marks are, then you know what your special powers are. And in the European traditions, historically, they tied it very much to do with astrology. And they had this view that of the as above, so below. You might have heard that phrase. So the macrocosm and the microcosm are interreflective of one another. And of course, in the Christian perspective, what they were saying, well, whatever you see in your hand is a reflection of the power of God, because God leaves his mark in your hand. So we can find out what those marks mean, then we can find out what God's intentions are for you. And so all the early European texts are all about how long you're going to live. Are you a good person? Will you get promoted and go to heaven or become a bishop? Or are you a bad person? You're going to die in a war or die of childbirth. So the fascination within the medieval chiromancy, as it's called, or medieval palmistry, is all about your fate and your fortune in that sense. So in all those traditions, no matter where they come from, they have this very strongly fatalistic attitude. And of course, that's not really true, but it's very much a reflection of the way that they understood the world. Probably the easiest one to understand it is in Christianity, because we're familiar with that being the overarching religious paradigm of our cultures. So if you think the Roman Catholic Church, the thinking of the Roman Catholic Church dominated all European thinking from about AD 400 to about at least 1500, 1600 AD. So the Roman Catholic Church is the dominant institution in Europe, and all academic study is done through monasteries and the church, and only religious people could read and write. And they had to do it in Latin. So there was they had a kind of stranglehold over intellectual inquiry. And then what happens, you get the Renaissance in the 15th century, which is the beginning of modern thinking and modern analytical thinking and empirical science. So that's when they start loosening the stranglehold over that. But because the Christian church dominated, and because there were certain symbols that were considered very important. So a triangle, for example, in Christianity, a triangle is a symbol of the Holy Trinity: God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost. So if you had a triangle in your hand, it meant you were blessed. But a cross, of course, that's where Jesus died. So the cross was always a symbol of death. So if you saw a cross in your hand, and depending on where it was in your hand, that would show how you would die. But you can see that's actually a product of the thinking that's determined by Christianity and the Catholic Church. And then the second thing to think about is that the Catholic Church dominated the economy so much that people didn't have any choices in life. If you were born a peasant, you were going to die a peasant. Life was nasty, brutal, and short, and you were lucky if you made it to 30. So this sort of fatalistic outlook is really a product of the fatalistic philosophy of the preordination or predestination, the ideas that you have within the Catholic Church. So that notion that fate is recorded in your hand is actually a product of a medieval worldview, and we can definitely say that's not appropriate today.
Okay. So what could you say? What kind of information are you at modern day able to glean by looking at somebody's hand? Can you determine their health, their success, their superpowers? Like, what kind of stuff
Yeah.
is able to be told? Like,
Okay.
what do you
All right.
learn?
Where do we go from there? All right. So if it's not your fate, what is it? That's a good question. Well, as I said, the fate idea is dependent upon your belief in a deity that imprints faith upon you, and then you don't have any free will, and then you don't have a choice. And there's a kind of problem with that comes about as a result of that. So one thing I would like to mention is this. I mean, we have so many assumptions about things. We have so many things we take for granted these days. It's important to remember that it was only in about 1895 that the unconscious was discovered. So we talk about dreams, we talk about the subconscious, we talk about intuition, we talk about things that go on beneath the surface of consciousness, generally called the unconscious. But the person who invented that idea was Freud, and before 1895 and before 1899, when his interpretation of dreams book was published, nobody had an idea of what the unconscious was. So what they were trying to do, they were trying to work out what people are like and what's going on with people. And they would do that by looking at what's called physiognomy. So physiognomy is the study of the body, and to determine from the patterns of the body, what's actually going on. There are remnants of that we still know about. Iridology. So iridology is the study of the iris, and people who can assess the state of health from looking at the iris. You have acupuncturists who study the ear and the shape of the ear, and they can do diagnostics in the shape of the ear and from the tongue. So there is this notion in many traditions that the body is a hologram and holographic representation of the entirety of the human being. And the hand is essentially that. The hand is a holographic representation of your entire physical being. Now, what we do know about the hand, and this is again, when I'm talking about this stuff, this is not stuff that you would study in palmistry, but this is stuff that you study in medical science that informs palmistry and I think, that gives us the best platform for interpreting the hand. What we know from the hand is that the hand is very strongly genetic. So your hand is going to be proportional to your body. So one of the first things you can tell, you can work out how tall somebody is just by measuring their hand. If you had a hand print, you can measure that and tell them how tall they are, how wide they are, whether they were overweight or something like that. Just really, really simple things. But because the hand is related to the shape and size of your body, that proves that there's a genetic component. And that's the most important thing when it comes to the fingerprint patterns. So in my book, The Palmistry of Fingerprint Patterns, I reveal all the genetic material. I mean, in the libraries when I studied it, I kind of gathered together all this incredibly tediously boring scientific material about the genetics of fingerprint patterns and simmered it down into a sort of digestible mouthful. But basically, there's been about 120 years of scientific research into the fingerprint patterns, purely from a genetic and medical point of view. So what we know about the fingerprint patterns is that particular instances of fingerprint patterns are associated with genetic disorders to particular kinds of diseases. So that's a really, really fundamental thing about it is that if you've got an abundance of whorls, you're more likely to have a disposition to a heart disease. If you have an abundance of loops, you more have a disposition towards things like presenile dementia. If you have arches in your hand, you're more likely to have dispositions towards gastrointestinal disorders. So the different types of fingerprint patterns are associated with genetic dispositions to particular kind of diseases. So we know that, and that's called medical dramatical that studied all of that. And the other thing that they studied in particular was Down syndrome. So Down syndrome is, as you know, is a chromosomal disorder, but we didn't know that 100 years ago. People didn't know about chromosomes in the 1920s, really. And but they could recognize the characteristics, the physical characteristics of people who have Down syndrome. You know, they have very distinctive physiognomy. And so again, this John Langdon Down, who named the condition, he was working in the 1880s and 1890s. You know, he basically put together the physiognomic characteristics that went together with that chromosomal disorder, and was able to build a profile of that. So we're basically profiling off the physical body. So this study of physiognomy comes out of anthropometry, which was the science of assessing personality and characteristics from the physical body of the person. And when you start looking at that, it actually becomes more involved because, of course, genetics don't just only determine our physical characteristics. It says something about our psychology, our intellect, and our emotional orientations, and so on and so forth. And so when you're looking at the hand, what you're looking at really is a kind of holographic representation of that individual at all those levels of human expression: physical, emotional, creative, psychological, and spiritual.
Which is literally given to you at birth. Like you're born with your hands, and it's basically telling you much of what you can expect, sort of along the lines of, I guess, health for sure, and in other things. So what,
Yeah,
I know you
that's an
talk a
important
little bit
point.
about bridging.
Let me just jump into that one, because that's a really important point you've made there, and that's really astute, and I think it's
Yes.
worth emphasizing, because people don't know. It's a funny thing. Everybody knows they've got fingerprints, right? And everybody knows there are lines on the hand, but nobody knows anything about them. So I like to start, well, what do we?
That's right. That's exactly
what do we
right.
actually know? Let's start with what we really actually know. Well, there's two things about fingerprints we know. So first of all, and there's no argument about this because the police use them. Everybody knows that every fingerprint pattern is unique. You don't have the same fingerprints on your fingers. You know, even you don't have the same fingerprint patterns on each of your 10 fingers. And when you start looking at things like twins, identical twins, even though they look physically the same, even identical twins don't have identical fingerprints. So if the fingerprints are that differentiated
I
in
didn't know
identical
that.
twin, exactly. If they're that differentiated, even in genetically identical people, i.e. identical twins, hang on, these fingerprints are saying something that's completely unique about you. Hang on, wait a minute. If I want to find out what it is to be uniquely me, what would be the best way of finding that out? I don't know, maybe it's looking at the fingerprint patterns. So that's the first thing. The first thing is like there's a uniqueness in fingerprint patterns. Okay, so they are biometric markers of what is uniquely you. One. Two, they don't change over time. Now, most people, are you sure? Well, yeah, no, we are sure, because you maybe didn't know that, but actually when you think about it, you must know that you knew that, because if they changed over time, it would be impossible for the law enforcement agencies in the world to use them for identification purposes, because I don't know. Oh, well,
Right.
I committed the crime 10 years ago, but my fingerprints changed, so now you can't prove it. No, that's not the case. Your fingerprint patterns stay the same throughout your life. So, and what that means is, and that's why they're used for identification purposes. So that means they're to do with your identity. Hang on a minute. Your fingerprints show something about your identity? Yes, what it is. What is your identity? Who are you? What is this continuity that exists at that time that is you, that is uniquely you? So the fingerprint patterns, everybody knows this already. They are descriptors of your identity and the uniqueness of your identity. So the question then becomes, how do we assess that, and how do we interpret that? How do we explain that? And that's exactly what my book does. The Primary Fingerprint Pattern says, look, you've got all these fingerprint patterns. If you have a whirl on this finger, this shows this kind of characteristic. If you have an arch on this finger, this kind of characteristic. So you can actually understand what those natural skills and potentials and dispositions that you are on the hand. But here's the third thing, and this is the kind of kicker, because what you don't know is that you didn't know that the fingerprints were formed in the womb. So you said, yeah, they're there in your life and you're born with them. You are, but we know exactly when the fingerprints form. They form in the 16th week of gestation. So between the 16th and the 24th week of gestation, or between the 4th and the 6th months of fetal life, that's when the hands are forming, and that's when the fingerprint patterns form on the ends of the hands. So so they are set at that particular point in time, and they don't change throughout your entire life. They are the markers of consciousness impressing itself upon the physical form of your body that gives you kind of psychological and genetic and emotional dispositions to experience the world in a particular kind of way. And they are descriptive of the way that you go about interacting with the world. And they're set in the womb, and it's throughout your life.
Don't you feel that sort of feels magical? Don't you feel, when you look at our bodies like that and the mystery of who we are, don't you find that utterly fascinating? I mean, how is that even possible when you really think about what you just said? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, if that doesn't say there's a lot more magic in the world, I don't know what does. Like,
Yeah.
so much that we don't understand about who we are.
Yeah. I mean, and look, and the things like that, I mean, that's, this is what I'm doing with the book, Primacy of Fingerprint Patterns. I mean, I'm not an embryologist, so I mean, it's not something that I've studied myself, but there are scientists who've done it. And in the book, I actually have an appendix in the book that talks about the embryogenesis of the hand, and it talks about the development of the lines and the development of the fingerprint patterns. And I put all the references in there. So people who are more scientifically minded, they can go and read all these particularly obscure medical journals and find out for themselves. But that information, it underpins my approach to hand reading, which is why what I do is completely different from the palmistry that people are familiar with, to do with like fate and fortune telling and stuff like that. When you look at it historically, fingerprinting is really modern, and most palmistry is really ancient. So most of the palmistry, where they talk about the lines of the hand, they talk about methodologies that were developed 150 years ago or 500 years ago. And then, and it's, a lot of it's a replication of what they call Victorian palmistry. But fingerprinting wasn't discovered until 1892. That's when they were classified. That's when they were used. And the first police force in the world to use fingerprint for identification purposes was the UK British police in 1901. So it's a very, very modern subject, and none of the palmistry books actually talk about fingerprint patterns at all. So when people say to me, what book should I get? I always go, look at a book. If they don't have if a third of the book on palmistry doesn't talk about fingerprint patterns, then forget it. It's really missing the point. It's got to start with the fingerprints, because the fingerprints are unique. They are unique identifiers of our individual identity. So we have to start with that. And they don't change. And I think that's something that's really important to consider with regard to palmistry too, because what most palmists don't seem to tell people about, and most people are not aware of, is that the lines of the hand change over time. And because the lines of the hand change over time, basically what that means is you can't rely on them to be an indication of your personality. They show you what's going on at a particular moment. They don't sort of show the fundamental characteristics of your personality. So the handprint is a snapshot of what's going on with you at that particular moment. So if you're healthy, your hand will be fine. If you get ill, you get degeneration in the hand, and the lines of the hand will show that. Endocrinological changes, that's probably the most significant one. If you take the handprints of a woman before, during, and after pregnancy, you'll see changes in the hand and the lines of the hand by virtue of the change in the hormonal balances as she's gestating the baby. Menopause is another one. It's really easy to see from the hand. The endocrinological changes of menopause show up. So endocrinology, hormonal balances, they affect the lines of the hand. There's no question about that at all. And probably the most obvious one is stress. So when someone's getting really stressed, they get more lines on the hand, and when they're more relaxed, their lines are more empty. So one of the things that we know about with the amount of lines on the hand is the amount of sort of neurological activity that's going on. And that makes sense. And because there are more nerve connections between the brain and the hand than between the brain and any other part of the body. So, the hands are sensory organs, right? So we touch. Arguably, the touch is the most important of the senses. So they are the organs by which we receive data from the world, but they're also how we transmit energy to the world, and that's done through anything you write is done through your hands. Any guitar playing is done through your hands. Even if you're building a house, you're doing it with your hands. Or if you're doing healing, you're laying on of hands. This energetic sort of expression comes out through our hands because the nervous system is really, really activated in the hands, and because biologically there is a bigger connection between the hand and the brain than between the brain and the other part of the body. So these are the neurological expressions of the physiology of our nervous system. And if all our consciousness is riding on the nervous system, if our emotions are synapse activity in the brain, if our cognitive processes are neural pathways, why would the hand not be an articulated expression of those things? And so that's really what we're seeing in the lines is we're seeing how those neurology is expressing. It's almost like the hand is like a blueprint or a printout of your brain patterns in that kind of way. And that's a really important, when you understand the biology of that, I think that's really helps people understand what's going on with the lines of the hand.
Yeah. All of that is so fascinating. Let me see if I understand this correctly thus far. The fingertips are
the fingerprints.
We are born with, they never change. The fingerprints, yes, the fingerprints, they never change. And the lines that are in your hand are a snapshot of what your experience is based on what's happening to you physically and age-wise and where you're at and emotionally.
Yeah.
So you can get your palm read like many times in your life because it's going to constantly change and give you different information each time.
Yeah.
But obviously your fingertips are consistent, and you said something like the fingerprints are portals of consciousness.
The impressions of consciousness on your body. That's what I think of them. Yeah. They're kind of the means by which consciousness seeks expression. So to think of it as an outward expression, I think it's probably a better way of thinking of it. But you're right. You've got it in a nutshell. You've got it. Let me just blow your mind one more thing, because it's really important to understand. I mentioned earlier on that the fingerprint patterns form in the 16th week of gestation, so the 4th month. What's even more interesting is the lines form earlier than that. The lines start forming in the hand between the 9th and the 12th weeks of gestation. In other words, by the time the fetus is entering its 3rd month, you're only 2 months pregnant, and the fetus is developing little fingers and little arms like this and little hands. That's when the lines start forming. So and this is the big thing that I think once you understand this is kind of proves the whole point about that the lines are not formed by the folding action of the hand, because the lines actually form in the hand before the hand can even move. There aren't any muscles in the hand. There's no muscular activity of a fetal hand. The fetus doesn't start moving its hand until about the 23rd, 24th week. But the lines are already there. And the lines are formed. First one, this one formed, that's in the 9th week, then the heart line in the 10th week, and the transverse line in the 11th week. So by the 12th week, the three main lines, and presumably some of the others too, are already formed and present in the hand. And yet the fetus is not capable of moving their hands. What's particularly interesting.
All right. So my next question would be, wait a second. Can I just ask like that? You just even saying that to me is like crazy, because what you're basically saying is the lines in your hand are formed in embryo, and that is going to tell you those three lines, bare minimum, give you a certain blueprint or a certain idea of that person's what? Like what? Tell me what those
Their
big
phys-
three
their
lines,
physiology
what are
and their,
they
their
already
vitality.
signifying?
Yeah, their physiology and their vitality, their cognitive function, and their emotional disposition. That's what those three lines relate to: the physical body, cognition, and affectation. This is how you and look. And this is the interesting thing is this is not speculation. I mean what I've just said there is a kind of quite a simple rendering of what they say in palmistry. They call it the lifeline, the headline, and the heartline. And those names are not entirely incorrect. But the lifeline is not to do with the length of your life, it's to do with your vitality. As we saw from that hand pyramid I just showed you, when the guy was young, he had a really long lifeline. And when he was old, his lifeline got much shorter. So he probably should have died 50 years ago if that theory was right. But no, there he is at 70. It's got nothing to do with the length of your life. It's to do with your vitality and your physical energy. And he's older, so his vitality is running out. So he needs to have an afternoon snooze. That's what it is. When he was a young man, he could work for 10 hours a day. He's just got less energy. So the lifeline, or the thenar line, is to do with physical vitality, how much energy you've got. But the transverse line, this line is to do with cognition. They call it the headline in palmistry, but it's definitely to do with cognition. And then this line is to do with emotionality. So now you can see in my hand, you can see that there were those three lines, but there were cases where this line, there aren't three lines in the hand, there are two, and these two lines join together. And when you get those two lines joining together like that, what's called a simian line. Now the simian line is important because it's relatively rare in the hands of people generally. So about 1% to 2% of people have this simian line, but it's incredibly common in Down syndrome. Now, what do we know about Down syndrome? I mean, everybody knows something about Down syndrome, and probably what everybody knows about people with Down syndrome is they're born with a congenital cognitive deficiency. So it's more difficult for them to function intellectually. But we also know that they are emotionally very effusive. They're very sociable. They're very playful. They like telling jokes and mucking about. I mean, they're very, very friendly. They love going up to people saying hello. So what you've got in the case of Down syndrome is you've got a line formation. The line formations to do with cognition and the line formations to do with affection and feeling are merged together. And what's happened is one of those lines is dominating over the other. And in Down syndrome, it's the emotions that are dominating over the intellect. So it's kind of, this is an old palmistry saying, but actually medical science has proven to be true. But this line's to do with cognition and this line's to do with emotionality.
That's
not
so
in dispute.
fascinating. And it's all predetermined.
Well, yes and no. Don't get into the predetermined thing because we don't know about that. I mean, that's speculation. What we do know is that the lines change. And so there are certain things that are I think we could say that are nature, like the fingerprint patterns don't change. But there are certain things in the hand, like the lines, they do change, and those will show more of our nurture or the experiences that we have. So we are a bit of both, is my answer to that question. There's certain, if you're only 1.65 meters, you're never going to play basketball. It's like you're just not tall enough, and that's not your fault. It's just a genetic thing. Don't pretend that you're a giraffe when you're a hedgehog. It's kind of like it's just not going to happen. You're deluded. You're small, and you're never gonna beat Marvin Johnson. So don't even try. It's kind of like there are genetic dispositions. If you are 6'7" and you train and you have the opportunity, then you might become a very good NBA player. But if but that's genetics plus experience, and so you could be 6'7" and become a game show host. Because you're intellectual. It's like you could have become a basketball player. Oh yeah, but I didn't want to do that, or my parents thought it wasn't a good job. Whatever. There's nature and then there's nurture, and we have choices within that. And so it's a mixture, and that's what the hand shows. The hand shows those parts of ourselves which are more fixed characteristics, if you like, and that I think is best expressed by the fingerprints. And then those parts of the hand that are susceptible to change, and but we have some control over. We have control over our health. We have control over our stress levels. We can make choices to minimize our stress. We can learn to do breath work and yoga. We can learn to regulate our body systems. We can change our career by retraining and developing skills. Just because you were born into a working class, manually laboring family doesn't mean you can't get educated and go to university. A good friend of mine, he was born in a mining family, but he was exceptionally talented, and he got a scholarship to go to Oxford University and became a PhD research chemist. So like nobody else in his family went to university at all. It's like it's partly there's a volitional quality in that. So yeah, so that, I think better not to think too much in predetermined, because particularly when I'm reading hands, I want to give people a sense that they have some agency in their life. I don't want to say to them, oh, it's all fated, God stamped it in your hand. You got no choice. You're born a serf. You're going to die when you're 30 in childbirth. It's all over. Don't worry about it. I'm going to help. I'm going to hope it helps. It's much more useful to say to people, you know what? You've got these kind of skills. You know what? You've got this particular talent. You've got this particular ability. Did you know? Has anyone ever told you that? I think to answer your earlier question, I think one of the really potent analyses you can do for people, and particularly young people, is to say what kind of job they should do, what kind of training they should do, what kind of university courses they should do. You can see the people's dispositions. If someone's really intellectual, they'll have a really long cognition line. If somebody's really interested in the law and justice, they'll have certain fingerprint patterns on their hand. So it's kind of like there are dispositions that we have, and if you can understand what they signify from looking at the hand, and you can give really good advice to people about what they should be doing with their lives. And so it's one of my, I really like reading the hands of under 25-year-olds. It's because they've just emerged as an adult. I call them emergent adults, and they've got this whole life before them, and they've got to work out what they're going to do for the next 40 years. And you kind of go, well, you know what? You'd be really good at doing this, or you'd be really good at doing that. I know your dad wants you to become an accountant, but actually you should be a lion tamer. And it's like you're kind of really enabling people to see what their strengths are. And then they don't have to spend the next 10 years getting into shitty jobs and bad relationships and
figuring it out.
It's like, oh my God, someone just gave me a map. Wow, I can go directly there. And so when you do that for young people,
that's right,
that kind of empowerment for them to make informed decisions about the choices they make. They can choose to do what they like with the information. But what I always experience when I read the hands of people who are older, 50 years, 60 years of age, when I read people hand, what they all say to me without fail every time is they say, I wish someone had told me that 30 years ago. It's like it lands in a way that they go, oh my God, you just described my entire life. That would have been really useful if I'd known that when I was 25. And I go, I know. It's kind of like, so that's the difference, you will find out.
Yeah. Preaching to the choir, I don't always say, hand reading, but I all the time talk about on this podcast the fact that there's people in the world, and I usually tell people to get their birth chart done, to get and have it read by a expert astrologist that can help you do the same thing that palm reading could do, hand reading could do, which is give you an arc of what you're good at, where your strengths are, what you're going to struggle with. And it goes back to this same theme that we come down here predisposed to feel certain ways about certain things.
Absolutely.
To experience certain experiences.
I'm an astrologer as well. So I've been doing astrology for 40 years too. So it's like, so I completely agree with you. And I think the two are very complementary. But here's the difference. And a lot of people in the modern world have there's still a lot of argument against astrology and the prejudices against it. And the thing is, it's an abstract. You draw a chart, and it's a plan, and it's a map of the heavens, and people can go in their minds. They can go, yeah, but what's the connection? I don't really understand the connection between the stars when I was born and what I'm like. I'm not really sure if I really like that interpretation. I'm going to dismiss it. Here's the thing with the hand. You can't dismiss the hand because it's on the end of your arm. You can't say, what's that got to do with me? It's got nothing to do with me. Yeah, it actually has. It's on the end of your arm. It's like, so the kind of impact factor is huge, because it's like all that skepticism that people can reserve about, astrology. Well, I thought to believe in it, but I don't want to go into too much, kind of reservation about it. You can't deny that with the hand because the hand's not attached to you. It's part of your physical expression. And it's just simply because people don't know what the hand can show.
Yeah.
And it's just not a subject that's been promoted properly, and which is why I wrote the book, The Palmistry of Fingerprints. It's like to kind of get this information out there, because the value of this knowledge is extraordinary. And when it's done well and done accurately, and when it's taken out of
I
this
agree.
prediction and this fortune telling aspect, because people, that's what people think about handwriting, but that's the view of handwriting that's 500 years out of date. It's like, that's like saying, well, doctors, they use links.
And you don't hear a lot about hand reading, palm reading anymore. And when you do, you think back to the old archetype of, the gypsy traveling,
Yeah.
reading palm kind
And
of
the
deal. Like you don't
and the
think of
gypsies
it
weren't
as
even
a
the
real
main source
science.
of knowledge for hand reading. I mean, they're just a little historical sideshow that happened in the 15th and 16th century in Europe. They're
Yeah.
not, they don't really know anything about hand reading. They were so pilloried and legally cast against it, particularly in Britain, that they couldn't work. They couldn't get any jobs. So of course, they resorted to sort of deceit
Wow.
and trickery and thievery and stuff like that, because they were legally. There was a statute of Henry VIII that came out in 1530, making it illegal to even be a gypsy. They just didn't like them, in the country at all in England. So hand reading's got nothing to do with the gypsies at all. It's a complete misnomer. Most of the hand reading in Europe was studied in universities. Isaac Newton studied hand reading, for goodness sake.
Wow.
This is not something that was a fringe science. It was part of the kind of curriculum of a lot of academic universities right till the end of the 17th century. So historically, it's had a lot of precedent. But the view,
Yeah.
but the view of it to do with this sort of fortune telling is just a legacy of a 500-year view that's just out of date, really. And so the palmistry of fingerprints is really trying to sort of say, look, there's actually more to this than meets the eye, and there's actually a lot of valuable knowledge gleaned in it. And so in the book, I just talk about fingerprints. I don't talk about lines. I don't talk about the thumbs. I don't talk about fingers. Just about the fingerprints, and also the palmar patterns too, because you get patterns in the skin ridges on your palm too. Have you ever felt the skin texture on your hand? Have you ever felt it? Have you ever done that?
I mean, I've been looking at my hand a little bit.
But have you
Not really.
not really. Hand like this. Can you feel the ridges on your hand? So go up. Can you feel this quite grainy? Go.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Go upwards towards the little finger. Push it up to the little finger rather than up to the middle finger. And you can, because that's, there you go. There. That's it. Can you feel it's a bit grainy?
Oh yeah.
All right. So that grain.
Yeah.
That grain, that's called the glyphs. Okay, so the dermatoglyphics is dermatoglyphics is like hieroglyphics. It means like carving in the skin. Dermaglyphs. So derma is skin. So that the thing that the skin on your palm is completely unique. There's not any other part of your body. Well, your feet have it as well, but compare it to the skin on your arm, it's a completely different type of skin. So it's a unique thing that only 3 animals in the animal kingdom have fingerprint patterns. Obviously, human beings, that's one of them. Second one is the apes. So,
chimps,
orangutans, they all have fingerprint patterns too.
Yeah.
And the third animal, quite weirdly, and nobody really knows why, is the koala bear. Koala bears, which is an Australian, have fingerprints as well.
Okay, yeah.
We don't really know why. Nobody knows why, but they do. But the
Interesting.
connection between the apes and human beings is really important, because it's only in the anthropoid apes and in human beings that we see the skin ridge like this that form the patterns that we do. So this is kind of a reflection of the evolutionary biology that human beings have evolved out of the simian family. So it's kind of like there's this connection that way too. But you also have toe prints. And so you have the skin ridges on your toes as well as on your fingers. So you know, and it's completely unique. But what's unique about that is that's what gives the sort of increased surface area. So the quality of these skin ridges is really, really important for understanding this interaction that we have with the world through the sensory nerves that we talked about earlier on. So it's a completely unique form of skin texture that only happens, and it gives it's because it's different that there's this openness to the nervous system. In a way that you don't get with, inside of your arm. I mean, that's quite sensitive, but if you're gonna feel the sensitivity of something, you use your fingertip. You don't use your elbow. Your elbow is not that sensitive by comparison.
Yeah. Let's get a little into You have read some very famous people in your
Mhm.
life.
I've not necessarily met them, but I have. I a lot of the time when I'm reading those kind of people, I'm actually I'm looking at their screen grabs, if you like, of people online and that sort of thing. So who are you? Who are you interested in?
I was sent a list of like Russell Brand and Jordan Peterson
Oh yeah.
and Barack and Michelle Obama and
In terms of contemporary people, and I like to be careful about what I'm saying, but it's you can get a really good idea of what's going on with people from just even from photographs of their hands. You can't tell everything, and you can't always see their fingerprint pattern, for example. But there are things in the hand that are revealed by those hands. I think what I'd like to go back to is to go talk about. We talked earlier on about the simian line, so I'm going to show you some examples of that, and I think, and I'm going to make that accessible by looking at it in terms of people that we know about, okay? Because we mentioned earlier on about the simian line, about the line of the headline and the heart line, or the emotion line, the affection line being joined together into one line, okay? So what I talked
yeah,
about with that,
yeah.
was I said that how that basically indicates someone who's kind of combining their emotions and their intellect together. And we saw that in the case of Down syndrome. In the case of Down syndrome,
Yeah, yeah.
what that means is the emotions override the intellect. And so they are cognitively challenged, but emotionally very effusive. And that's one of the personality characteristics of people with so-called simian lines, where these two lines are merged together. But I've got a couple of famous people with that same line formation. And I think when you see this, you'll kind of make more sense of who they are. So the first person, you probably recognize that,
Okay.
is Robert De Niro. Can you see that?
Is it? Oh my God! It barely looks like I see what you're saying now. But yeah, a younger Robert De Niro
Yeah.
than he is now.
But
But
can you
yes,
can you see that he's only got the one line across the hand, across there?
yes, I do. I see
So
that
those are
too.
totally fused together. Now he's an actor, and he's this is not him, his personality so much. But have you ever wondered why is he so good at playing psychopaths? Why is he so good at playing mafia bosses,
Oh,
hired assassins? He's really, he's such a powerful actor when it comes to all those kind of roles. And that's because he's got the simian line. The simian line basically gives him the capacity to really channel all that emotions into his acting
hone
role.
in.
But yeah,
Yeah.
he's not overwhelmed by it in the way that the person with Down syndrome is, but he's got his headline and his heartline fused together. So he's basically picking.
Mhm.
He's not. My argument with him is he's not really acting. He actually really feels like that on the inside. He's got this powerful, intense emotion. So you could say, how does he conjure up such powerful, intense emotion? I mean, the eyes. I mean, look at the way it looks. He's like, he could kill you with his eyesight. And it's because he's got an intensity. And one of the things we know about people with simian lines is they have an extraordinary intensity. And so, and then you go, well, hang on a minute. Let's see are there any other examples of this? And we go, well, actually, there are. So let's get back at that. So if I go this way and find another one, there you go, Joaquin Phoenix. Can you see that one now? Can,
Oh,
can you see that one?
I see Joaquin. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Look at that.
Oh
Can you see
yes,
he's
look
got
at
the
that.
simian line as well? Now, I don't know if you remember recently he played somebody called the Joker in a movie. I mean, again, the same kind of overwhelming
Yes, of course.
psychotic, overwhelming emotional intensity that he was able to bring to that role because he's got the simian line. So as I said, these guys are actors, but they're basically
Yeah.
powerfully expressing that emotion through their craft. And what that line shows is this kind of disbalance between the two things together. So again, his ability to tap into that is an ability that's brought about to him by the fact that his two lines aren't separated like they are in most of us. Most of us, we can control our impulses. We have a way of kind of rationally dealing with things. We don't allow ourselves to get overwhelmed by our emotions and our feelings. And that's what's indicated by the two lines being separate. But what those two actors do and why they're so good at acting is they allow the power of their emotion to overwhelm them. And that infuses their character with the kind of manic, psychopathic intensity that both of those actors are able to bring to the screen in the roles that they played. Now, I'm not saying they're like that in their
Yeah.
personal life, but they can draw on
Yeah.
that in a way that other people can't because they've got those two lines so strongly formed like that. And I'm going to give you another example too, because it's quite interesting to see when you see this in other people as well. So you probably know this character. Let me just find the best one. I think. All right. So this is another character who's got this as well. Boom, boom.
Oh yeah, that's Tony.
Yeah. Can you see?
Tony Robbins.
Yeah. Can you see?
Yeah,
He's
yeah,
in line.
yeah.
All right. So what's his?
Oh yeah,
All
yeah,
right.
yeah.
So what's his message? His message for 40 years has been, be focused, be single-minded. You can do it. You can break on through. You can achieve great things. His message is the message of focused intensity and focused energy. And that's what the simian line brings to any equation. It gives this kind of single-mindedness. And when he's in all the seminars, he talks about how to become successful in a challenging world. And basically what his message is, you will become successful if you're able to put all your energies and focus it in a particular direction. But of course, he can do that naturally because that's what he's got. He doesn't have the two. He can completely align his passion with his intention, his emotion with his head. Now, that's great for you, Tony. But listen, 99% of normal human beings do not have that line. So it's like you're selling a method that works really well for you, but might not quite so well for other people because they don't have the kind of exclusivity of attention. They don't have the sort of intensity of focus. They can't apply themselves in that as you do, because you have that as a natural gift, as a natural thing that you've got. And people with simian lines, non-Down syndrome simian lines, are often incredibly successful in their lives because they can be so single-minded in the pursuit of what they want to do. And I mean, I've never done a Tony Robbins thing, but the message he seems to give, as far as I see, is be single-minded in what you want. Get a focus, decide what you want, focus on that, exclude everything else, and stick to the plan. And that's what comes really easily to people with simian lines. Another good example is Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton's got the same thing in her hand as well. Now, it's incredibly difficult to be successful in politics. It's even more difficult to be successful in politics if you're a woman. And Hillary Clinton has been at the top of the political game in America since the early 1990s. That's over 30 years. That's an incredible achievement. Love her or loathe her, let's leave the equation. You have to have respect for the fact that the woman has battled and won through against so many men in such a heavily patriarchal institution as the US government for such a long time. You got to have a bloody-minded, single-minded, focused intensity to be successful in that world. And she's got the simian line as well. And so this is this characteristic. As I said, this line formation only occurs in 1% of people's hands normally. So it's really, really rare. It's even more rare in the hands of women than the hands of men. So this drive, this intensity, this focus, this putting all your eggs in the basket, putting your heart with your mind, aligning your emotionality with your intentionality is a gift that those people have been born with that 99% of people don't have. And so that's their strength. And if they can be successful.
Which also just rounds back into a lovely little bow of we are brought down here, built with certain characteristics, predispositions that we are born here with and that reveal themselves however they do through our life experiences and what happens to us. But there is a basic predisposition for who we're going to be as our selves, our human being self here on this plane. There is somewhat of a plan or a predetermined way in which you will react to certain things, what will happen to you. I mean, don't you find that to be the case? That's what it screams like to me.
You've got choices, but there are certainly very strong dispositions. So here you go. Here's Hillary.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
All right. So she's
Yep.
yeah.
And what do you know about Donald Trump? Talk to me about DJT.
All right, hang on a second. I'll just go one more person with simian lines I want to talk to you about because it's quite pertinent to the relevant political climate.
Okay.
That's Tony Blair. He's the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
and
Yes, he is.
he's got it in both hands. And you can see the quite clearly he's got that sort of single-minded focus on that runaway. Yeah, so like
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Oh yeah. Oh
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. He's the guy who he basically destroyed the Labour Party in Britain in the 1990s. And funnily enough, I wrote about him in the 1990s, and it was published in the Times newspaper. And and unfortunately, everything I said about his character and personality then, and I said, well, the problem is, if you've got someone like that coming into power, they're going to change things, and they're going to make things a lot better, or they're going to make things a whole lot worse. Unfortunately, he made things a whole lot worse. Trump is an interesting character, and he's, what I think I see in his hands really is his sort of real estate background. I mean, you can see those kind of qualities in his hand. But what you've got there in particular, what's in particularly important is, I'll just see if I can get his handprint up, is the index finger. The index finger in his hand. We haven't got his actual handprints, but we have seen. There's a cast of his hand, which is quite interesting to view. I'm not quite sure where the cast was made, but it's
Oh.
significant in the way that it's shown. So I'll just bring that up on the screen now. So that's his right
Oh.
hand. That's his
Yeah.
right hand. And I said we can't see the fingerprints on it, but there's a couple of things that I think are really important, and these are things that we all know about him. If you look at the little finger, can you see the little finger is quite long? It comes up above that crease there. And the little finger's to do with talking and communicating.
Yeah.
And so when people have got a long little finger, they're usually very persuasive communicators. I mean, I think you wrote a book called The Art of the Deal. I think that's what you'll find it's called, which is kind of like the power of persuasion and the power of negotiation. So what you've got in this hand, really, and it's a very square palm, you've got someone who's quite earthy, quite down to earth, quite materialistic, quite kind of interested in security and money, but is also a really good communicator. And that's been his success over the many decades, particularly in the 1980s. But what you've also got here, can you see how the index finger is sort of sticking out like that? Can you see there's a big gap between the index finger and the middle finger?
Yes.
And that's always someone who's attention seeking. That's always somebody who kind of wants, who wants to prioritize and emphasize themselves and put themselves to the fore. So there's an attention seeking quality in that. So what I see in his hand is someone who's very interested in money and building things and creating security for himself and his family. But he's a bit of an attention-seeking person. But arguably, he's out for doing what he wants for himself and for the benefit of his family, and that's his kind of priority and emphasis. Politically, he's influenced by lots of other people. Donald Trump, I think, is a symptom of a process the United States is going through. I think it's not he's more of a symptom than a cause. But if you look at,
I would agree.
If you look at Oprah Winfrey interviewing Donald Trump in the 1980s, she's fawning all over him. She says she's the one who says to him, "You ever thought you might run as president?" And she's asking him a question 40 years ago, and he goes, "Oh, I don't know. Maybe I will. Maybe I won't. Oh, maybe if it get really bad, maybe I will." So the very qualities that people lauded in him in the 1980s are exactly the same qualities that everyone say, "Oh, he's a problem now that he's in the presidential chair." But he is an articulation of the American dream. 40 years ago, he was number one at the top of the American dream. This is the American dream, to run a business and make loads of money and have lots of cars and a place in Florida and run a casino, whatever it is. The statements of opulent wealth, which he demonstrates particularly well, is, particularly from a British point of view, you go, well, what's wrong with that? That's the American dream. And when you got Oprah Winfrey lauding him on that exactly those bases in the 1980s, it's not really surprising. But there are consequences of that attitude, and I think the consequences are becoming apparent to people now. So he is who he is, and that's that comes down to the question again about fate and predetermination. Well, you are who you are unless you're aware. And so if you're not aware of the motivational forces within you, then you will behave in a certain kind of way, you will be in a certain kind of, and you will be directed by those things, and they will make you become the person that you are. And Jung had a really interesting way of looking at that. He basically said, that which we are unconscious drives us, and we call it fate.
Yes. I think that for me, it is just, it gives me the ability when I, on my own spiritual awakening and my own process, not only does it allow me to understand more about the fact that we need to live consciously and be more present and pay attention to things like what we're thinking, what we're saying, it also allows me to give people a lot of grace for their belief system, for how they react to things, for who they are, because a lot of that is unconscious. It's built into the cake and they're just who they are. And I
Yeah,
think that if more people understood and were able to give people more grace, it would be
sure.
extremely helpful in
Sure.
today's
But at the
love.
same time, when we're acting out of unconscious urges or unconscious factors that we don't know about, that's when we cause the most damage. If we have psychological trauma from childhood and
100%.
we're not aware of that trauma, it will drive our behavior. The number that just about everyone who sexually
Yep.
abuses children was already sexually abused themselves as a child. So there's a trauma pattern there that gets replicated. If it's unconscious, they don't understand that and it just happens automatically. They're not even thinking about it.
Mhm.
If they're conscious about their trauma, they can resolve
Yep.
that trauma and they can deal with that problem, and they may not perpetuate the pedophilia
Yep.
further down the line. So unconsciousness is not an excuse.
Yeah.
Unconsciousness is basically probably the cause of most of the abhorrent behavior that happens in the world, and inconsiderateness of other people, a lack of awareness of your own patterns. And that is the thing that we can't tell from the hand. When you look at a hand, you cannot tell how aware somebody is. All you can tell is what the forces are that make up personality and what their dispositions are. So the hand really shows those kind of dispositions. And there are things in the hand you can say, well, you can see why they're not very aware of things. Or you can see childhood trauma in the hand, for example. I mean, that's another really big issue when we're talking about hand reading is that people don't aware. I mean, and there are a number of women who've come to me who've been sexually traumatized or have been sexually abused as children, and you can see the effects of that in the hand. So the hand records those kind of traumatic experiences. And it's an invitational opportunity when someone comes for a hand reading to explore those particular kind of patterns in the hand so they can uncover and explore the kind of traumas that they had in childhood. So the impact of parenting and the childhood experience we've had is clearly shown in the hand. So and that's what the hand reading does, is it gives an opportunity to become more aware of what we are, whether it's our dispositions, whether it's our health indications, whether it's our psychology, whether it's traumatic things that happened in your childhood, whether it's gifts and abilities that we've been born with that haven't been encouraged or developed. And the more self-awareness we have, the
Yes.
more we can live our life in a way that's aligned with who we really are. That's when life becomes fulfilling.
Yes.
And that's when life becomes joyful, when our life is an expression of the essence of who we are. And what better articulation of the essence of who we are
Yes.
than the fingerprint patterns on the end of our fingers? They are unique
Yes.
identifiers of
Yes.
what it
Yes.
is to be you. Your hand is a unique expression of your entire personality. It's a holographic representation of yourself. And the more you know yourself, the more, and hand
Amen.
reading is one of many, but I think a really good tool for developing that self-awareness. The more self-awareness you have, the better, the more you can live your life consciously. And therefore, the more you are in control of your life, can make informed choices and not be driven by unconscious forces that you're unaware of that people call fate. You're not fated, but in order to get out of fate, you need to develop self-awareness.
Yes, I love that. I think that's an amazing perspective, and I agree with it 100%. Most of the problems that are happening in the world today is because 99.9% of us don't know who we are. We don't know that we have a purpose here. We don't know that there's a plan. And we're just walking around unconscious, reacting to our emotions, never analyzing, never using our critical thinking skills, and never questioning.
Yeah.
That, my friend, is the problem of who humanity is in a nutshell. We don't know who we are.
Yeah.
We are living as unconscious beings
Yeah.
and just
Yeah. And look, and
destroying everything in the process.
and I've studied astrology. I've studied psychology at university level. I've done counseling work. I'm completely aware of all sorts of therapeutic modalities. I mean, the Myers-Briggs personality inventory, I think, is really good. I think human design
Yeah.
is silly. I think astrology is fantastic. I think psychotherapy can be good and it can be terrible.
Yeah.
Some counseling techniques are great and others are not. Somatic body therapies are really useful. So I've explored all these things in lots of different kind of ways. But But
Yeah.
every time I come back to hand reading, and I haven't found anything that's comprehensive like hand reading. All those bits can maybe like have a little window or it'll shine a little light on some aspect of yourself. But the hand kind of expresses the totality of your individuality because it's rooted in your physical body. You are an individual because you have a physical body. You are a differentiated being because birth, the umbilical cord separated you and you went boom and you breathed in. At that moment you took your first breath in, you are a differentiated being and you die when you stop breathing. So your body is actually the vehicle of your expression as an individual. So if we can, that's why the body is so important. And that's why the fingerprints are so important. The hands are a description of the uniqueness of this physical incarnation that you have. So you're driving the vehicle, you're living in the world, and you've got a map on the end of your hands that says everything about you and at all those different levels, emotional, psychological, creative, physiological, spiritual. If you can get a handle on that, you have a very big way into understanding your sort of life purpose and creating and I mean that in the kind of the sense of being fulfilled. You know, it's like your life purpose isn't to become rich and famous and own a gold lame toilet, you know, and a casino in Atlanta. You know, that's not your life purpose. You know, that those are effects of other things. But if your life purpose is what drives you, what makes you happy, what makes you fulfilled. And that's unique to each of us as individuals. And we need to find something that describes that uniqueness that is intimately connected to who we are. And there's nothing more intimately connected to who we are than our hands. And so it's powerful. It's really, really powerful, Henry.
It is super powerful. If people want to get a hand reading, no matter where they are, what is the best way that people could reach out and get somebody that's reputable that they'll get a solid reading from? Where do people find people like you to get a hand reading
well,
from?
I'm working on that one. As I mentioned earlier on, 30 years ago, I was in charge of the UK Chirological Society, and the Chirological Society existed to kind of, even when it was founded in the Victorian age in 1889, it basically existed to provide a kind of umbrella group where we do training and we have diplomas, we have courses, and so we have an examination system. I mean, one of the things like people not aware of is you can actually train as a hand reader. I mean, I did it myself in the 90s, but I've replicated that now in the last 7 years. I've set up something called the International Hand Reading Association. So I've got together with other colleagues of mine and people who've been doing hand reading for 30, 35 years. And we've created this organization now, which is international. We have conferences that we hold twice a year on research papers. We have both academics coming to present papers to that conference as well. And this weekend just gone, we had our ethics module we were teaching at 18 students from all over the world, Romania, Norway, the United Kingdom, New Zealand, United States, Canada. So we had 18 people come and to do this training module about the ethics of hand reading. And basically what is going on in hand reading consultation? What are the pitfalls you have to be aware of? What is the dynamic between the sort of hand reader and the client, which is like a sort of therapist and the client? And what's unethical to do? And one of the things that we're very clear about, it's completely unethical to do predictions and fortune telling from the hand, because to do that is really disempowering people. We've all heard hand readers, have all heard stories of how somebody went to a palmist and said, "Oh, I went to a palmist. He told me I was going to die when I was 53, and I'm 52 now, and I'm really worried." I mean, I've had people come to me and say, what am I supposed to do about that? So it's incredibly important not to say those kind of things. And anybody who does kind of fortune telling prediction palmistry, as far as I'm concerned, is completely irresponsible. Not only irresponsible, they're actually immoral, because what they're doing is they're stealing potential away from a person. And they're disempowering that person. They're not allowing that person to enter into a sense of responsibility to their life. And they're kind of telling them that their life is fated and there's nothing they can do about it. And that is incredibly unhealthy psychologically, people. So we've set up this ethics committee, and basically, anyone who's studied with the International Hand Reading Association has to go through that process. And so you can trust that they're not going to be stealing faith from you or telling you anything to do with prediction, unfortunately. Because as we saw from those handprints, the lines change over time. So you actually can't tell anything on the lines anyway, because you couldn't tell in 1950 what the lines were going to look like in 1991, because, you haven't got a time traveling machine to take you to look at them. Handprints only show you what's going on this moment. They don't tell anything about the future.
the past can be recorded in the hand, because the past, if it's remembered, is kind of still being present in someone's life. If someone was traumatized as a child, that's still affecting them now.
Okay.
That'll be evident in their hand, but that's the past affecting the present. But it doesn't say anything about the future at all. So you can't do prediction from that. So that's the first criteria for basically anybody who's interested in looking at handreading properly. Ask yourself, do they do prediction and fortune telling? If they do, they either don't know anything about handreading, like they don't know that the lines of the hands change, which kind of means they don't really know anything at all. Because even you know that, you only seen one handprint, and now you know you can't do prediction from the lines of the hand. So, if someone's been claiming to be studying palmacy for 20 years and they say you can do prediction, they clearly haven't looked at the handprints. Or maybe they have, in which case they're lying. It's one or the other. They're either ignorant or they're lying, but they're not somebody you want to go to for handreading. So on the website, handreadinginternational.com, there's a list there of qualified, reputable, ethically based hand readers all around the world. And they've got their contact details and you can contact them. Or if people want to have a hand reading with me, I mean, I'm on there too. And you can contact me directly. I mean, quite a few of us now do hand readings by Zoom. So it's possible to do it as a Zoom call too, other than just in person.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's a bit expensive to fly to New Zealand just for a hand reading consultation. But it's important to know, this is something that's important to know, and I think people don't really know this about hand reading. A hand reading consultation usually takes between 2 and 3 hours. It's not a short thing.
Oh, okay.
It's not a short thing.
All right.
I mean, a proper hand reading could probably take longer than that, but 2.5 hours is about as much as anybody can take in one session. So that's the first thing. So it's long. Second thing is the most common thing that people who've done therapy or counseling before, what they always say after hand reading, they say, I learned more about myself in that session with you than I did in 10 sessions of psychotherapy. So in terms of the quality of the depth of self-awareness and the depth of self-understanding that comes out, if you imagine, a year long of psychotherapy and that's what you got in one session, which makes it a lot more cost effective actually, but but that's also presents something about the poverty and the paucity of psychotherapy. And the problem with psychotherapy and counseling is basically they have a different approach, and their approach is, well, tell me about what's wrong with you. And you go, well, I don't know what's wrong with me. That's why I came here, because I have no idea. I just feel like this and I feel like that, and I don't know why. But you just talk about it a bit. So you spend ages trying to find out what the problem is. With hand reading, you can go, right, well, let's talk about your mother, because that's obviously the problem right there. You can direct the conversation. People like who are psychotherapists or who are counselors who've done hand reading. That's exactly what they do. They use hand reading as a way to kind of assess the client and kind of kickstart the conversation, so they know where to direct the conversation, so they can actually be more effective more quickly. That's the difference. So the second thing then is, look at what the hand reader says that they do. Do they talk about your personality and your psychology? Do they talk about your childhood trauma? What kind of services are they offering? And the good hand reader will be talking about those things. And as I say, the hand reading should last 2 or 3 hours. It's a detailed thing. It's like it should be. You're exploring your consciousness. You couldn't possibly expect to tell you everything about you in 15 minutes. That'd be ridiculous. That'd be like going to a psychotherapist. Like, well, I've only got 15 minutes, so sort me out in 15 minutes. You're just nuts. You wouldn't do that at all. It's like everybody understands. It's a bit of a process. So it's an important thing to do. I think, but I think probably the most thing I want to emphasize to people. I'm going on a little bit. I want to emphasize, particularly the people, is I want to emphasize getting my hold of my book, because it's kind of been road tested for 30 years, this book. And this explains what the fingerprints are, what they signify. It talks about the development of the fingerprints in the womb. It talks about the use of the fingerprints for identification purposes by the police, anthropological studies of fingerprints. But the bulk of the book is explaining what each of the fingerprints mean when you find it on each of the fingers. And so even if you've got no knowledge of hand reading whatsoever, you can get this book. It'll teach you how to identify which fingerprint patterns you have, and then you can just look it up. You go, oh, well, I've got a whorl on my index finger. What does that mean? You go to page 53 and it will tell you what the whorl on the index finger means. And, oh, well, I've got a whorl on my ring finger. Oh, look at page 57 then, And so it's kind of like it explains it all really well like that. So it's really easy and accessible to use. And I've called it the palmistry of fingerprints, because I think, it's not the science of fingerprints. It's an accessible book. And it's about personality, it's about psychology, it's about who you are. And that's really the strength of the book, is it's talking about those things in terms of like your identity, because ultimately the fingerprint patterns are markers of your unique identity. So if you understand what they are, you understand what is you. And that, I think, is quite an important thing to discover.
It's the most important thing to discover. I mean, I really think that we're all down here to try and figure out who we are and be the most authentic version of ourselves, which is going to bring us our highest and greatest good.
I totally agree with you.
That's it right there,
I
kids.
totally agree with you. Totally agree with you.
Yes.
And I've not found a better tool for doing that than handwriting. It's like, and I've studied lots of different things. And this one, I've been looking at hands for 43 years now. It's kind of like it's proven itself, I think, to be the most valuable of all the tools that I've discovered anyway.
I really do suggest and encourage everybody, if you get on the website, find somebody and get your palm read, man. I mean, like, it will illuminate to you where you're at in life, what you're good at, where you're supposed to be, where your issues are, and figure out who you are. Christopher Jones, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
I think what you do is really fascinating. It's important work, and keep doing what you're doing, sir. You come back here anytime. I will put your book in the show notes, your website.
Cool. Thank you so much for having me on your show. It's been wonderful to be here. It's been a lot of fun talking with you, Kristen. It's been a great experience, and I look forward to coming again sometime. It'd be great to be back.
I would love to have you, sir. You were an absolute delight, and I'm super excited to have you on the F.A.T.E podcast. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we will see you next week on F.A.T.E, from Atheism to Enlightenment. Journey well, everyone. Bye-bye. And that is a wrap on this episode of F.A.T.E, from Atheism to Enlightenment. I want to thank Christopher Jones for coming on the show. I mean, he is like one of the leading experts of the world in hand reading, palm reading, chirology. It's amazing that I even got him on the show. I loved our conversation, super knowledgeable. I find palm reading to be fascinating when you think about the fact that you were born with information imprinted in your hands that talk about everything from your health to what you're going to be predispositioned to be like, your characteristics. It's just unbelievable that there are people in the world that can look at your hand and tell you a little bit about your own consciousness, where you're going, what to expect in your own life. I mean, I was excited to get him on the show, but it was fascinating to talk to somebody with so much knowledge about it and so much passion about it too. Clearly, he's super passionate. He's so informative. So if you're looking to get your palm read, which I highly recommend that people start doing things like this, like getting your hand read, go get your birth chart, go do things that are going to illuminate yourself to who you are, what you're meant to be doing, what you're good at, what your health arc may be. Like, we really do all have a bit of a blueprint. Before we get down here, much is discussed, soul contracts were made, a plan was put in place, and you can figure out some of it by looking at going to get a hand reading, doing a astrology birth chart. All those things are going to help you figure out this already very difficult life that you're in. Life's not easy, and it doesn't feel like it's going to do much other than get a little bit harder all the time. It doesn't feel like life's getting easier. It feels like life's getting harder to be. Like, as much as technology has helped us with so many conveniences, it certainly hasn't made humans' lives any easier. So we all get down here. We're all trying to figure it out. And I think doing something like going to get a hand reading, and sitting down with somebody who can give you an idea of who you are and what direction you should be going into, you should take full advantage of that if you're in the position to do so, because it'll help you figure out what direction you should go in life. You know, we all have stuff we're supposed to accomplish and things that we're just born at being good at. And a bit of a plan is in place. You should try and just investigate more about who you are and what your soul mission is here, because you have one. Everybody has one. And if you're curious, you should reach out to my friend Christopher Jones and try and get your palm read, your hand read. He'll sit down and I'm sure you will get so much information and it'll make so much sense to you and it'll resonate with you and it'll just be super helpful in navigating this already very difficult life that we're all living, gang. So do that. I mean, we learned a few things too. I learned that the hand part changes. I didn't know that till today. I thought once your hand, always your hand. I didn't realize it changed with age, time, health. I didn't realize. I didn't know that it was just a snapshot of your life. I thought it was your life, like the trajectory of your life, all in your palm there. That's what I thought that was. It's it's just a snapshot in time, and then these all change based on where you're at in your journey. Is that fascinating, or is that just me? I mean, I think it's fascinating. And the fact that you can learn so much about the characteristics, um, everything from your health, like it's just absolutely amazing how much information you can get about your body and where you're supposed to be in your hands. Like, is your fate actually in your hands? I think yes and no. I think that you can go and get a palm read and it can give you good insights as to where you're supposed to be going and what you're supposed to be doing. But I think at the end of the day, free will reigns, gang. And it is really up to you and the choices that you make as to what and how your life goes. And, make good choices, kids. Listen to your inner being, your your heart as much as you can. That is never going to steer you wrong. It is always going to lead you into your correct path. But lean into your intuition. Lean into what your internal navigation pull is telling you, and that will always pull you in the right direction. So, anyways, gang, thank you, Christopher Jones, for coming on the show. I'm going to put his book, The Palmistry of Fingerprints, will go in the show notes, along with the website to people who do hand reading out there, so you guys can figure out and find a good match for you to get your hand read. And I'll put all his other information in the show notes. Check him out. He is one of the world leaders in this, gang. So if you're looking for somebody to give you good insight and get a good, decent, very well, thoroughly explained hand reading, I suggest you reach out to Christopher Jones or one of his associates, because he could definitely help you out and put you on your path, you know? If you want to follow the show, I'm on Instagram at F.A.T.E. podcast. Follow the show. I'm definitely starting to post more and I'm becoming more active out there, guys. So get involved. Feel free to reach out to me, send me an email, tell me what you think of the show. Tell me if you're looking for me to discuss a certain topic. I love your feedback. I would like to start being more interactive with the audience and interactive with anybody who's, curious about spirituality or going through a spiritual awakening and has questions, and maybe I can help them. I don't know. We'll see. But with that, gang, we will see you next week on Fate, from Atheism to Enlightenment. Keep journeying with me, gang. Welcome to your fate, everyone. I'll see you then. Bye.